From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador. This is From the South, and I'm Carla Gonzalez. The National Electoral Council of Venezuela has announced the results of Sunday's municipal elections. Out of 335 electoral lists across the country, 156 of them have been assigned. 142 were won by the United Socialist Party. Over 20 million Venezuelans were eligible to vote for local councillors. Almost 5,000 local candidates from 51 political groups and parties took part in this election. A delegation from the Center of Latin American Electoral Experts oversaw the process. Let's hear from our correspondent in Caracas, Luis Tavera, who has more.
National electoral authorities have taken stock of these elections. There have been 25 elections in the last 20 years. Elected councillors will represent communities and intermunicipal chambers to enforce policies from the national government, particularly when it comes to matters of social protection. This afternoon, President Nicolás Maduro spoke about the relevance of these elections, especially when the country is victim to an international siege and sanctions. Yet, Venezuelans have survived and still strongly believe in their country's democracy to come out and vote. Analysts have given their take on these elections. They say that despite media reports claiming that Venezuela is anti-democratic, Venezuelans have proven otherwise by voting en masse.
That was Luis Tavera from Caracas. Voters queued up from early in the morning outside voting stations before doors were open. We have more in this report.
The traditional fireworks for dawn call mark the beginning of the electoral day in Venezuela. Over 20 million voters are eligible to vote in this process to choose local councillors.
We are calling on the Venezuelan people to exercise the right to vote. It is very important for our country and also to tell the whole world that every aggression against the people of Bolívar and of Hugo Chávez will be faced with mobilizations and electoral participation in key elections for the country.
Almost 22,000 voting stations open around the country at 6 in the morning. The first voters were already queuing to cast their ballots.
We, as the people, are telling to the world that we solve our problems in peace, with all right to vote, a right for everyone. I want to call to those who haven't voted yet to go to their polling station so we can decide our destiny in a democratic and peaceful way. Today we are choosing our closest public officials. It's very important to the strengthening of our democracy.
The voting process is very fast, according to voters.
The voting process is easy. We Venezuelans are already used to our voting process, which is very quick, and for that reason there are no queues, because the system is automated.
It's
very simple and the process is really fast. There are no issues. We have to support and exercise the rights established by our constitution.
Polls will remain open as long as there are voters waiting, as is established in the country's electoral law.
Now we move to Peru, where according to preliminary results of a referendum, 85% of Peruvians support political and judicial reforms to combat corruption. President Martín Vizcarra announced the reforms in August, following a series of high-profile corruption scandals that were reluctantly approved by Congress. The referendum asks whether there should be a second chamber with Congress and a ban on the re-election of politicians. Vizcarra has welcomed the initial results.
Through this intermediary, I want to thank Peruvians for trusting in this government. We will not disappoint you, and in the coming days, during this week, we are going to address the nation on the next steps and an analysis so that things are a little calmer, and with the results of the referendum.
And Peruvians headed to the polls to vote in this referendum on 4 constitutional reforms aimed at stopping corruption. 24 million people voted on whether to approve a bill to regulate the financing of political parties, a judicial reform, and the return of a bicameral Congress. These reforms were introduced by President Vizcarra, following a series of corruption scandals involving several politicians and public officials. The electoral process also coincided with the runoff to elect governors.
In this referendum, we vote for the reforms of the Constitution that we have proposed and that promote democracy. The referendum allows the population to choose, and finally, we as authorities will respect the will of the people. One must work on issues that enhance democracy, that strengthen the institutional framework. Why would we not want to improve the system of administration of justice and the political system? We are not saying that these reforms will solve the problems. This is a preliminary step. We have always said that this is the first step for the reforms that all Peruvians want. And we see that with joy and through the Democratic Party taking place in Peru today.
This referendum took place after months of protests to reject corruption. The government promoted the vote to introduce a series of reforms to try to prevent new controversies.
Really, all the 4 questions in the referendum are quite important. And well, I can tell you how I voted, of course, but I think that each one will contribute so that our country improves, because they are different levers of what we are looking to reform.
This idea is that this referendum allows us, as the people, to make a decision, to choose an alternative in order to be able to change things that the Congress should be changing, but in the end, they are not doing a good job.
Now to sports. There were celebrations for River Plate's win over Boca Juniors for the Copa Libertadores second final. They were rocked by confrontation between fans and riot police. Police used tear gas to disperse fans in Buenos Aires who threw stones and other objects. The Copa Libertadores final game was moved outside the country to Madrid in Spain after Boca's team bus was ambushed before the originally scheduled game, leading several Boca players injured. Cuban doctors continue to leave Brazil after their collaboration with the More Doctors program came to an end. We bring you the story of Leandro Diaz, the first doctor to help the Wahhapi community in the Amazon.
The Dr. Leandro Diaz Salinas will never go back to the Amazon River in Brazil. He's now heading to Cuba. Salinas was the last Cuban doctor to learn about a resolution from his health ministry to enter collaboration with the More Doctors program in Brazil. The announcement was made when he was arriving to the Aramira indigenous territory, where he stayed for 15 days.
I
said goodbye to them, to the indigenous people of the village. I told them I will be returning to help them. But a friend told me we were leaving to our country. I was very sad when I heard that.
Salinas talked about how difficult it is to arrive to these villages and the concern he has about leaving them behind, without any medical attention. Dr. Leandro, we're going to take your message to the community, so you can say goodbye to them. Leandro wrote a goodbye letter for the Wahhapi people, an isolated community in the Amazon region.
Dear patients, something very unexpected has happened. Our collaboration with the More Doctors program has come to an end, just as I was starting to adapt to your village and your culture. As it always occurs, doctors get attached to their patients, and now I feel very sorry I can't help you further more, since it's something I know you really need. It was a pleasure to have the opportunity to live with you. I love you.
Now, the first doctor in helping the Wahhapi community has left.
We have more stories coming up. We'll be back.
Our actions have an impact on the environment. It's our responsibility to change for the sake of our planet. Let's be part of this transition. Watch, preserve, and protect your Earth. Green Zone. Wednesdays, only on Telesur.
We are present at every event where our nations are staring. We believe in a new global vision, united in every broadcasting. We keep expanding our horizons and working on a closer and better communication. Now, in Grenada, Telesur, the news source from South America and the Caribbean.
Welcome back. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has announced plans to increase state-owned oil company Pemex and its budget by over $3.7 billion in 2019. This in order to enable the company to increase its oil and gas production. The plan aims to reverse the drop in the company's production levels, which have been going down since 2004. The government aims to reach production levels of 2.4 million barrels a day by 2024. Migrants from the Central American caravan are working with Mexican volunteers to improve their living conditions in the border city of Tijuana. Our correspondent Pablo Perez brings us the details.
Chicharra 5, la chicharra 5.
Day after day, thousands of migrants of the Barretal shelter try to continue with their normal lives. Despite traveling more than 4,000 kilometers to find the U.S. border closed, but for some, like Pedro, this situation is not an excuse not to keep working.
To bring food to our table, we have to work. There is no need of begging people for money or food.
Volunteers and local authorities are trying to organize the migrants' living situation. They're keeping a record of how many migrants are part of the shelter.
We feel safer. They are calm and humble people here. There were certain people trying to threat our safety, but they couldn't get in.
Religious and social organizations are coordinated with local and federal authorities to feed more than 2,500 migrants 3 times a day.
The food is really good in here. Me and my wife cannot complain. They have given us everything we need. We can even eat more than once a day.
The migrants are in charge of cleaning the shelter along with the local authorities. Together they show the xenophobic accusations that Central American migrants are dirty and leave trash everywhere are fake.
We can do it. We need to give our best. The 95% of us who came from Honduras want to make it in this country. We just need to give our best.
Social organizations are also helping Central American migrants to improve their living conditions inside the Barretal shelter. Here in Tijuana, there has been an improvement on security measures and more migrants are demanding respect for their basic human rights. Many migrants are trying to legalize their migration status in Mexico in order to find a job and have a better future, while others are still trying to cross the border into the United States.
Pablo Perez Garcia, Telesur, Mexico. That was Pablo Perez from Mexico. A new community-funded TV channel has been launched in Chile. Its mission is to tell the stories of those who lived and survived under Augusto Pinochet's military dictatorship. We have more in this report.
This is the place where they'll be broadcasting from. It's equipped with a kettle, so lots of conversations will take place over a cup of tea. And there are some interesting discussions to be had. The staff have a wealth of experience in addition to their communication skills. They have first-hand experience of living under General Pinochet's rule, from the sacrifices they made and their resistance to brutality. On the 30th of October 1957, thousands of families from Cordón de la Miseria took charge of the areas in La Chaca, La Feria en Los Lagos, and the Hermín de la Victoria in the capital of Chile. These communities formed the resistance against the dictatorship of General Pinochet in the 70s and 80s.
In the first few years of democratic rule, we saw how nothing was on TV. As young people who fought against the dictatorship got together and asked ourselves, what are we going to do? We have to fight against media domination on TV. We decided we had to air what happened to us on a daily basis.
For the first time, they can show what people lived through, and to do that, teamwork is crucial.
Since I was a child, I accompanied my mum to marches. So this TV channel is here to accompany people. It's our way of showing another version of events.
When they received one of the first terrestrial digital television concessions in the country, they saw the possibility to reach more than 2 million people, but more money is needed.
We don't have computers, so it is very difficult for us to go digital. We have a state that is deaf, blind and mute, which takes no responsibility. They have placed great difficulties on us.
But that hasn't stopped them, and they remain determined to succeed. They have received various funding offers, even from the right wing.
We refuse to take money from the right wing because their hands are covered in blood. So if we help the right wing to set up a communal channel, we will be covered in blood too. For us, it is important that we are a media entity made up of a community cooperative.
The fiercest competition is from the mainstream, and one day they hope to share that platform too. So for now, their fight continues.
Ecuador's National Assembly will choose the country's new vice president on Tuesday. Maria Alejandra Vicuña resigned from her post after President Lenín Moreno relieved her from her duties amid a corruption scandal she was linked to. Assembly members will have to choose among three main candidates proposed by Moreno. Now to Colombia, where at least 13 people have been killed and 20 others injured in a bus crash. At least 4 minors are among the victims. The bus was transporting a local basketball team to play a match in the southeast of the country. The causes of the accident have yet to be clarified. Relatives of the victims of El Mozote massacre in El Salvador have received the remains of 6 of their loved ones 37 years later. The remains were exhumed in 2015 after the Inter-American Court of Human Rights held the state responsible in 2012 and will now be buried in El Mozote. This was the worst massacre committed by the military during the country's civil war. Around 988 people were murdered and more than half were minors.
Justice should be made. Relatives, by receiving the remains of their loved ones, can close the mourning they experienced for 37 years. Today, they will have a chance to bury them according to their beliefs.
The Chulumani Youth Symphony Orchestra in Bolivia has helped teens and children have a better future. Children between 4 and 22 years can now join this orchestra and learn classical music while building a career in the arts. The goal of this organization is to help young people stay away from alcohol abuse and violence. Around 80 children are now part of the musical group. They hope their love for music can turn into a real occupation.
When music comes into your life, it changes you. You even have a lot of different dreams, goals, that start to form from the moment that music opens your eyes to another world, to other things, to an incredible universe.
Member states of the Caribbean community CARICOM have reinforced their support for Cuba despite U.S. sanctions. The regional body released a statement to mark the 46th anniversary of diplomatic relations with Barbados, Guyana, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and Cuba. CARICOM countries say they are committed to solidarity with Cuba. Cuban ballet star Carlos Acosta has premiered his biographical film called Yuli at Havana's 40th International Film Festival. Yuli tells the story of success and perseverance based on Acosta's autobiography, No Way Home. Acosta was trained at the National Ballet School of Cuba and performed with some of the world's greatest ballet companies.
This is not my story. This is your story too. This is the story of all Cubans. This is a mirror for them to know, and also I tell you more. This is a universal story. It's a story of the journey of a humble family and how it manages to overcome obstacles. It's a story that should give hope in a world where there are so many bad things, so many wars. A story like this is important. Some child somewhere in this planet will be reflected in this story.
We're taking one last break, but stay with us. And we're back. The European Court of Justice says that the British government can unilaterally stop its Brexit process. The court also said that the UK does not need to consult the other member states for its decision to leave the European Union. The ruling comes just a day before the British Parliament is due to vote on a Brexit deal agreed with the EU by Prime Minister Theresa May. And on Sunday, thousands of people protested in the Brexit betrayal rally in London, organized by far-right activist Tommy Robinson and the UK Independence Party. They slammed Prime Minister Theresa May and her Brexit deal for going against the will of the people. The UKIP party said the march was to demand a definitive departure from the European Union.
And criminals.
The pro-Brexit rally was countered by an anti-racist and anti-fascist demonstration, marching under the banner, "No to Tommy Robinson, no to Fortress Britain." This was organized by the Labour grassroots group Momentum. They have claimed victory, saying the rally was twice the size of the one organized by Robinson. Demonstrations took place ahead of Tuesday's vote on Parliament on the Brexit.
I'm a primary school teacher, so I work with children who are affected by racism. I have friends and family who are affected by racism, and also, I don't think that it's good for anybody in society to have those kind of divisions and that kind of hatred.
Personally, would like Brexit not to happen at all. I love Europe. I think we should be part of Europe, and I really hope that that when the vote comes on Tuesday, that the whole of Parliament gets behind the fact that the deal Theresa May has got on the table won't happen. And I'd like there to be another referendum.
The United Nations Conference on Migration has endorsed the Global Pact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration Flow. The pact was endorsed by leaders and representatives of over 160 countries, despite the withdrawal of the United States and a number of European countries who are opposed to the pact. Hailed as the first international document on managing migration, it lays out 23 objectives to open up legal and safe migration.
The compact is not a treaty. Moreover, it is not legally binding. It is a framework for international cooperation, rooted in an intergovernmental process of negotiation in good faith that specifically reaffirms the principle of state sovereignty.
French President Emmanuel Macron is set to meet leaders of trade unions and business leaders in an attempt to end protests that have shaken the nation. He will later address the country for the first time since the protests against his proposed reform started 4 weeks ago. They started in November when protesters in yellow vests blocked roads in protest against tax hikes and high fuel prices. On Saturday, thousands of protesters took to the streets of Paris. Our correspondent in Paris, Sergio Rodrigo, brings us more on the protests that were held over the weekend.
More than 1,700 people have been arrested in Paris during the Yellow Vest protest that took over France for the fourth consecutive weekend. These protests have left hundreds of people injured. More than 89,000 security forces have been deployed around the country. Here in the capital city, the police used tear gas and rubber bullets against protesters, leaving thousands of people injured and detained. According to the latest polls, 80% of citizens support the Yellow Vest protests and only 20% support the measures of the government of President Emmanuel Macron. Macron is expected to announce actions regarding these events. Some sources said he could be offering apologies to the nation.
That was Sergio Rodrigo from Paris. The president of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Joseph Kabila, has said he's planning to stay in politics when he steps down after the election on December 23rd. He also says he does not rule out running again for president in 2023. The long-delayed election will mark Congo's first democratic transfer of power and put an end to the 17 years of Kabila's rule.
What will be my role after I step down? My role will be to make sure that we don't go back to square one. Square one meaning where we found the Congo 22 years ago. My role will be to do that by advising, by giving all the necessary information, advice to be taken or not taken, so that we don't go back to the years that should be history in this country.
And recent polls have shown that you weren't that popular before you announced that you were actually not going to run.
Why don't we?
Belgium's Africa Museum has reopened to the public. After 5 years of renovations, the museum has now updated its pro-colonial exhibition to one that is critical of it. The museum was criticized for ignoring the savage rule of King Leopold, whose troops collected severe hands of Africans resisting slave labor. Activists have urged the museum to return stolen artifacts to Congo, so the museum isn't viewed as an extension of colonialism.
What needs to be done is that colonial history becomes part of the curriculum of Belgian schools, in secondary schools, and so that there's much more educational programs. You can't leave it only to our museum to provide the storyline on contemporary Africa and on the problems of the colonial past. It's really something that should be addressed by the educational system, starting with all the schools.
And with that, we come to the end of this news brief. For this and many other stories, you can find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And we're on social media as well, on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.